Hello, 725. This is Professor Johnson, just doing another just-in-time video just to check in. I tell you, I just got back from camping this weekend down in southern Wisconsin. The southwestern part of the state is easily my favorite. You know, you're near the Mississippi River, and it's a dramatic change in scenery, compared to the central part of the state, which is above the glacial flats. So, the central part of the state is really flat and sandy. There's tons of trees, of course, but there's not a lot of dynamicity in the landscape. But then you head south past where the glaciers broke, and you can see what the world is like when the glaciers haven't come through and evened everything out, and there's bluffs and valleys and kettles and moraines, and all that, in that area. But it is it's a lot more work to hike in that part of the state. So I'm just getting back. I'm sunburned. I'm tired. Just to let you know, if I'm a little low energy, that's exactly why. But while I was camping, I had a chance to read a book that has been on my list for quite a while. It's a book by John Ronson called "So You've Been Publicly Shamed," and I went into it with high hopes. I heard a lot about it. I actually picked it up on recommendation. I think Natalie Wynn in a ContraPoints video brought it up, and it sounded interesting. Public shaming in the era of social media. I don't think any of us can deny that we haven't seen that. It's common news. Maybe you've even participated in it. I don't know. So I went into it with high hopes, and this is not going to be a book review per se, but since we're here, might as well talk about it, right? Because it's pertinent to what we're learning this summer. So my overall impressions of the book were that it was good. It was a good overview, but didn't provide a lot of answers, and that's because there's not really any easy answers to be had. So in this book, John goes through several what I would call case studies, individuals who have suffered public shaming in the news or online at one point or another. And there are several people mentioned in these case studies that have suffered shaming to one degree or another. There are some, such as Max Mosley, who had articles about him posted in the News of the World, the defunct magazine over in the UK. I would say it's a salacious magazine. It was run by Rupert Murdoch's company, so it tends towards that salacious news type deal. But as for Max himself, seems to not really feel very ashamed about the articles that were published about him, for one reason or another. However, several of them essentially had their lives, ruined by the incident of shaming, and I think one or two of them over very benign sort of things. One of them, Justine Sacco, if I remember correctly, I may be getting the name wrong, but posted what would be, let's see, she was headed to South Africa, I think, to visit family, and she tweeted something along the lines of, I'm going to South Africa, I hope I don't get AIDS. Oh, oops, never mind, I'm white, LOL, or something like that. Which, of course, not a funny joke, kind of tasteless, but not the kind of thing that, if you heard it, if you were with friends or something like that, the kind of thing you might blow off or say, well, that's kind of tasteless, and that would be the end of it, right? And I feel like in a situation like that, somebody who is capable of feeling shame, that alone probably would teach them their lesson. Of course, not everyone's the same, so your mileage may vary on your results on that one. But it did lead to her losing her job, and it took her a long time to recover, if she had at all. I don't recall. But certainly an incident of public shaming that you know, probably a bit much. All right, undeserved. The punishment not fitting the crime in that case. And then I noticed in the book that there was one case study that John brought up, which I thought was extremely interesting, but he didn't go into depth on. And that's the one that I really wanted to talk about. Now, I really wish that I could recall the names in the book. I'm sorry, I did just read it, but I can't, keeping them all straight. I read it, over the course of a single weekend while camping, so in bits and pieces here and there. But the case study was an example of there was two individuals that were attending a tech conference. You know what? I may just look it up in the book here, simply because I do want to make sure that I at least get the names right. And by the way, if you haven't heard of So You've Been Publicly Shamed, I do recommend picking it up. As I said, it's very light on answers, but there are not really answers at this point to be had. Just give me a moment and I will find it. Christine Sacco. The case of Lindsay Stone, that one was quite interesting. Nope, that's not it. Hold on. Give me a moment, I'll find it. I did find it. So it is the earlier parts of the book that I recall, but it was a case of two gentlemen, Hank and Alex, who worked in IT, and I'm paraphrasing the story somewhat, worked in IT and were attending a conference, and they were making jokes to each other, immature jokes, certainly. You might even say inappropriate jokes to each other, but only to each other, at a below conversational level while in the crowd of this conference, making jokes, for example, about what a big dongle some piece of tech must have, and a dongle, of course, is a hardware device, not unlike, for example, a USB device can be a dongle, like could act as a hardware key or something like that. And making other jokes like, oh, I'd like to fork their repo, these sorts of things. And in the middle of one of these speeches, a woman, Adria Richards, stood up, turned around, took their picture, and posted to Twitter, "Not cool, jokes about forking repos in a sexual way," and quote-unquote big dongles right behind me at PyCon, and one of the images that she captured right there attached to the tweet as well. And the two of them in the picture are looking straight ahead. They look uncomfortable. Alex in the picture is looking at Adria. She takes the picture, but he notices her, but he's not flashing her like a look or anything like that. It's more like he's just looking towards the camera. And as a result of this, I believe that the both of them were relieved of their job. And Adria herself, in the fallout that followed, believing that her essentially taking this stance and leading to their loss of their jobs being inappropriate, was essentially crucified on social media as a social justice warrior who should have just minded her own business, because it's not as if they were doing something that was overtly harmful to her. They were speaking to each other in low tones. And this whole thing was very interesting to me, not necessarily because of the public shaming initially, but in John's interviews of these people afterwards is what I found to be particularly interesting. In that, I would like to find a quote here directly. If I may, when John contacted Adria, as well as Alex and Hank at the time. Hank and Alex, of course, their cause was taken up by certain elements online. You might call them, well, this is called them misogynist elements, of course, because what they saw was a woman, I think she's a woman of color, even if I recall correctly, who had, taken it upon herself to put Hank and Alex in the spotlight over essentially a dumb, harmless joke, in their opinion, and to take it upon herself to correct them or to out them on social media, which led to a loss of their jobs. And so they took up their cause, as they do. And of course, as these elements on the internet do, they took it way too far and started, calling for, all kinds of horrible things to happen to Adria, which did eventually result in her losing her job. Now, she, at the time, of course, had only her own perspective, which was that she shamed these two individuals. She feels rightfully shamed them. And then all of a sudden, there's a bunch of people brigading her and, rating her and sending her terrible messages. So she assumed that they were in on it, which I think is, just to be clear, I believe is an unfair assumption. Of course, it's always better to assume the best of people until they give you reason not to. That is sort of one of the golden rules of civil society. But even when John went to interview her later, she, while Alex and Hank, I'm not to generalize or paint people with the same brush. I certainly don't want to do that. But Hank and Alex were Caucasian men working in IT. So we can say non-minorities in their field for certain, but of people in that field, let's be honest here, people who work in these jobs in IT, just because you're white and a man doesn't mean that you thrive off of confrontation. It doesn't mean that you enjoy, getting into any kind of altercation, whether it be a battle of wits or physical challenges or anything like that. I can honestly say the number of people, regardless of their gender, that truly enjoy that kind of thing is thankfully a vast minority. And Hank and Alex were certainly no different. They were definitely within that camp. They didn't want to offend anybody, and as soon as they found out that somebody was offended, they apologized profusely for it. But so they had humility. They were shamed. They were sorry before they were shamed, and then after they were shamed on social media, well, even more so. So sort of, for them, the act of shaming, which I suppose before we actually get into this, to be clear, we do cover this in the class, but if you don't recall or we haven't gotten to it quite yet, our society works because there are two codes of conduct. One is the legal code that determines what is or is not permissible under the law, and a violation of the legal code results in penalties. They can be criminal penalties or civil penalties. Criminal penalties mean that there's been a violation of order with the state. Civil penalties mean that there's been a violation of rights against another individual. But there is a second informal code of conduct that is known as social norms, or the social code. And the penalty for violating the social order is stigma. Now, stigma is applied through a process like shaming, and shaming as a process was actually part of the legal code until, well, depending on which state we're talking about, I believe it was one of the Northwest states, I want to say Vermont or New Hampshire, was the last holdout to use public shaming in a legal capacity, and I think it was abolished in the 1930s or early 1940s, perhaps. But again, totally going off memory here, so I may be completely wrong about all of those things. If I am, I apologize. These are not researched videos. These are just check-in, just-in-time content videos, so I'm kind of spitballing here as I go. But in a legal capacity, if you think about how that worked, individuals would have been publicly shamed as a result of being ordered by the legal system to undergo shaming. So walking around with a placard around your neck, or standing in a public pillory, or, and so on. I take that back because now it occurs to me that there are some jurisdictions, I think there was one down in Texas, and this may actually be in John Ronson's book, of judges that would sentence individuals to shaming in lieu of jail time. So, and that I think may have gone on well until the more modern era. But in any event, that is an official codification in the legal code of public shaming. But that's still results in stigma, and stigma is a corrective action. Essentially, everyone else looks at you and you feel shame because they are judging you harshly for something that you've done, right? Which means it's only effective if one is capable of feeling shame. And there are a lot of ways that someone may not be capable of feeling shame as they ought to, or as they are intended under those circumstances. So for Hank and Alex, they were susceptible to shaming. They absolutely were. They were already sorry before they were shamed, and so the act of shaming them simply twisted the knife, right? It just made it much more worse, much more humiliating, and that they were not in a position to withstand any form of humiliation. They're already, I don't know them personally, but from the way they were described, they seem like fairly timid individuals. Now, other people in John's book, for example, Max Mosley, the aforementioned person who was shamed in the news of the world, seemed to not be subject to shame. And in his case, he even posits possibly that he may have some cluster B personality disorder. Cluster B personality disorders don't deal with shame the same way that neurotypical people might deal with them. They may not be capable of feeling shame, or they may transform shame or externalize shame in order to avoid essentially feeling those feelings. And in his case, he simply just didn't care. He just didn't feel the shame at all. And I have some theories on that, but we won't get into them here because they're not really appropriate to talk about in this class. But that's one reason why someone might not feel shame. But what I found very interesting was Adria's reaction to her public shaming that came out as a result of her shaming Alex and Hank. And I would like to quote her now, and I'm assuming that this quote is accurate. It is directly out of John's book, and he did interview her. And in this section, John has revealed to Adria, after all of these years, they still have not spoken personally, Adria and Hank or Alex. So John is informing her that he did talk to Hank, and he wasn't responsible for any of the vitriol she received following her post on Twitter. It was other people acting independently, doing their research, and taking it upon themselves to threaten to harm her. So I quote, Adria replied that she was happy to hear that Hank, quote, wasn't active in driving their interests to mount the raid attack. But she held him responsible for it anyway. It was, quote, his own actions that resulted in his own firing, yet he framed it in a way to blame me. If I had a spouse and 2 kids to support, I certainly would not be telling jokes like he was doing at the conference. Oh, but wait. I have compassion, empathy, morals, and ethics to guide my daily life choices. I often wonder how people like Hank make it through life seemingly unaware of how the other lives in the same world he does, but with countless less opportunities. Now, this is an example of another, and I'm not going to diagnose Adria here, that would be inappropriate, but it is an example of something you might see in this case. Other examples of the way shame can be transformed by those who happen to have either traits of or diagnoses of cluster B personality disorders. And what she's essentially doing here is she's not feeling any shame because she's externalizing all shame by saying that it's all their fault. Her actions, now, and this is my opinion 100%, were completely inappropriate. If 2 people are having a quiet conversation with each other and they're telling jokes and you don't like what they're saying, speak up and, ask them to be quiet. Now that is a tall order for some people. Some people are unable to advocate for themselves, but there are countless other options. This is not an either-or situation where either you suffer through their jokes or you publicly shame them. There's a million other ways that this situation could be handled. All of them are more tactful than posting on social media and getting them, publicly shaming them as that. But needless to say, I should say despite that, what's done is done in this case. You'd think that this is many years later, Adria may have had time to reflect and say, well, maybe I didn't handle it as well as I possibly could have. But no, instead she's externalizing all of these problems, saying that what she did is just fine because she doesn't tell jokes like that because she has, unlike it's implied, unlike other people like Hank and Alex, she has morals and ethics and so on. And, it just sounds, I don't know. The essence of humor is surprise. And I myself don't personally really generally appreciate blue comedy really so much. But that's just my own personal tastes. I still understand why they're funny to other people. But this kind of externalizing. Now I feel like this has kind of become, not, I won't say common, but this idea, this a way to avoid responsibility, does seem to crop up fairly frequently in let's say a vocal minority on online discourse, right? This idea that one can be blameless if the other person is worse, right? So what if Hank and Alex don't have any morals or ethics? Does that mean that they don't have the right to exist, to talk to each other, and to tell jokes? There certainly is a line over what would be acceptable for them to do on themselves, as long as it's not interfering with other people. And in this case, Adria may make an argument that it was interfering with other people. It was interfering with her and her ability to enjoy the conference, which, if so, fair enough. But again, there's a lot of ways to handle that other than that which was done. But even after years of potential time to reflect, still to say that what she did was completely inappropriate because they are who they are and she is who she is, that's a non-starter. And that's an example of why shaming is a bad idea and doesn't work. That's why we stopped using it in terms of the legal code many, many years ago. It's not an effective form of punishment. Or I will say it may be effective in the short term at the expense of the long term, because people who are shamed don't always have the capacity to feel it, and indeed may react in inappropriate and unfortunate ways as a result. So in criminology, you no doubt are familiar with the concept of crimes of self-defense. So a positive defense where, maybe you have committed homicide, but you're found not guilty because you were defending your own life. That's a crime in self-defense. But there's another subject that you may be less familiar with, which are known as crimes in defense of the self. Now, if you've ever heard of a crime and you've read about it in the paper, let's say that a father, for one reason or another, decides one day, seems to just snap and kills his entire family, spouse and kids and all. And you may ask yourself, my God, what could cause someone to do this? What could they have gained that would be worth losing everything? Well, typically these are known as crimes in defense of the self. So what is more important to this person than their family? What's more important to them than the rest of their life? What's more important to them than their freedom, than their property, everything? You lose everything when you do something like this. Well, the answer is the self, right? These people typically have, and I'm not agreeing with them having this view, mind you, it is a completely erroneous and a abnormal thought pattern. But the idea is that in their head, they have built up this image of themselves as a father and a husband, as somebody who's in control, somebody who wears the pants, and it's extremely important to their identity. And when it's threatened, it causes them to essentially react in this way to preserve their sense of self in a way that is destructive and horrible. But that is, for some people, what is the most important thing, is being able to look at themselves in the mirror and think, I'm a big man, or, I'm a worthy person. And I say big man because crimes in defense of the self are typically male crimes, right? Now, when you think about Hank and Alex, part of the reason why misogynists would have taken up their cause is certainly partly because of Adria herself, her identity, and how she presented herself online. But on the other hand, also is due to the fact that for men in American society, and for the large part world culture as well, we are defined by our productivity, right? What we create, what we do, is more than just our job. It is part of what makes us men, and it's an unfortunate thing. It truly is. I'm not, to be clear, agreeing with that stance at all, but it's undeniable that that is part of male. Well, let's just say, and I won't even say male. Let's just say that that is part of masculinity, is productivity. So for Adria to do something to result in them getting fired is more than just her getting revenge, or her even setting right something that she felt was a perceived problem. It was, at least for these misogynists online, a direct attack on their masculinity, right? It's just a big mess, is basically what I'm getting down to here. So the reason that public shaming doesn't work is because it's about far more than just setting right one situation. And it's about far more than correcting someone's behavior. Public shaming is about destroying a person's identity, right? And some people, when that happens, like Hank and Alex, or Justine Sacco, or I think it's Jared Lerner in there, their self-image is destroyed. They shrink away. They try to find a path through and to rediscover who they are and what their purpose is, and something like that. Other people, like Max Mosley or Adria, in this case, they instead shrink into the shell, right? They defend their self by essentially doing one of various different things. Going into complete denial, for example, or externalizing all of that and having it all roll off the like water off a duck's back, right? It doesn't affect them, although it does, right? And some in that situation have nothing left to lose, and so engage in what's known as criminal coping to alleviate that strain. And I'm, of course, talking about strain theory here, if you're not familiar with criminological theories. So it's not effective, and it doesn't work. And we do it online as essentially... Whoa! Okay, that was... Sorry. We essentially do it online almost as a form of entertainment, right? It's the outrage machine, right? Right? The great outrage machine of social media. Anyway... I'm gonna cut it off there because I've been jabbering on here for about 30 minutes. There's a lot more that I could say on the subject, and I just might for the undergrad version of this class. Of course, I have a lot more time than I do in the graduate version, so this is something I might construct a lecture around for the undergrad version of this course. But if you do have any ideas or thoughts on this, I would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on YouTube here, or send me an email through Canvas or something. Feel free to share your thoughts with me. I'm interested in hearing them. If you too have read So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson, and you have thoughts on the book, likewise, share your opinions. I'd love to hear them. So that'll be it. We will talk to you again soon.